If it's Monday, war and Washington, Ukrainian President Zelensky prepares to deliver an urgent message before Congress that he needs their help as the White House bypasses lawmakers and sends Israel more than $100 million in emergency ammunition. Plus, the former president's legal and political immunity. Brand new NBC polling shows Donald Trump with a commanding lead in Iowa, with just 35 days to go until the first votes are cast, as special counsel Jack Smith asks the Supreme Court to reject a key pillar of the former president's legal defense. And abortion battles. NBC's exclusive interview with Governor Gretchen Whitmer as she signs legislation to expand abortion access in battleground Michigan, as a Texas woman in the national spotlight leaves the state amid a grinding legal battle over access to an emergency abortion. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake in Washington, where President Biden is facing a stalemate on his biggest foreign policy priority, more wartime aid for Israel and for Ukraine, amid growing demands by Republicans for major concessions on domestic immigration policy. For weeks, the administration has been urging Congress to pass its emergency security assistance package before the end of the year, at which point the White House says it will run out of money to support Ukraine. And in its latest efforts to increase pressure on lawmakers, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Washington today for a last-ditch lobbying effort. It's his third visit to Washington since the war began and his second visit in just 3 months. The White House confirms President Biden will host Zelensky at the White House tomorrow to underscore America's unshakable commitment to Ukraine. Zelensky is also expected to brief Senate lawmakers as well as meet for the first time with House Speaker Mike Johnson. Speaking at the National Defense University today, President Zelensky previewed some of what his message to lawmakers will be.
Every one of you with command experience knows what it means when instead of moving forward, you're just watching, waiting for armor or equipment while your enemy is satisfied and preparing for assaults. Tomorrow, in meetings with President Biden and Congress, I'll talk about what result we can achieve next year based on our achievements this year. By pushing Putin back, we'll strip his aggression of its meaning.
But Zelensky and President Biden face a tall order, convincing lawmakers and the American public that more funding for Ukraine should be a top priority right now. According to a recent poll, more Americans believe that the U.S. is providing too much assistance to Ukraine as opposed to not enough, and those margins are even starker among Republicans. While the White House looks for ways to continue to fund Ukraine, it appears to be taking advantage of a loophole to ramp up its support for Israel, bypassing Congress to approve $106 million worth of tank ammunition as the IDF ramps up its military operations in southern Gaza. The IDF says it's now focusing its efforts on 3 major Hamas strongholds, including the Khan Yunis area in southern Gaza. Yesterday, the Director General of the WHO said that 1.9 million people, that's almost the entire population of the Gaza Strip, have now been displaced. Joining me now is Ali Rafa at the White House. Ryan Nobles is on Capitol Hill for us, and Hallie Jackson is in Tel Aviv. So, Ali, I'll start with you. What do we know about tomorrow's meeting at this point, and how and why did this all come together the way it has?
Yeah, Garrett, well, we know that President Zelensky is going to be returning to a very different Washington, D.C. Than the one he visited a few months ago, because the future of U.S. aid to his country obviously hinges on several domestic issues in this country. And we're told that we could expect these two to have a press conference together after Zelensky and President Biden meet at the White House, where no doubt Zelensky is going to talk about what needs to happen in order to attain this next supplemental funding package, but also seek assurances from President Biden as to the future long-term of U.S. aid to Ukraine. As we've seen, the longer that this war with Russia goes on, that has no end in sight, frankly, at this point, the more that support for continued U.S. aid to Ukraine dwindles. So you can imagine that the White House, the Ukrainians want this image of these two together together in agreement to be seared not only in the memories and the minds of the American public, but also in the minds of the leaders of allied countries, NATO countries, who we have also seen support dwindle among as to the future of aid to Ukraine. And the stakes could really not be higher for Zelensky going into this. We saw OMB Director Shalonda Young last week send a letter to lawmakers on Capitol Hill saying that U.S. aid, how much money is left in U.S. aid to Ukraine will run out by the end of the year, saying that that will, quote, kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield moving forward. So the stakes, again, could not be higher for Zelensky, Garrett.
The polling here has been pretty consistent that Americans now think the U.S. is actually giving too much aid to Ukraine as opposed to not enough. Does the president need to do more to make this sales pitch? Is he counting on Zelensky to be the person to sell Americans and help get out of this mess where Ukraine aid is tied to border policy?
Well, the White House knows Zelensky can only do so much. He can add pressure. He can add awareness to this issue of how dire it is to get this aid to his country. But at the end of the day, they also know that Republicans on the Hill are not going to move unless, as you mentioned at the top there, those disagreements over border security and immigration reform are solved. So we have heard the president as well as the Secretary of State say that the president is willing to make concessions. He is willing to compromise on this issue. But what I think is so important for viewers and for everyone to remember is that this is an issue that is decades long, that many different administrations and sessions of Congress have tried to tackle, and it hasn't been able to do that. So much hinges on the next few days as really time is running out to get this package through Congress for Ukraine.
Right. I know there's a lot of skepticism on the Hill that a decades-long issue can be solved in a couple of weeks with this as the particular carrot and stick. Ali Rafa, thank you for your reporting. And Ryan Nobles, on the Hill, it seems like we really see the potential limits of Zelensky's ability to sell what he needs. He's not going to get the same kind of reception he's used to receiving when he comes to the Capitol, is he?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, Garrett, that the novelty is worn off. When President Zelensky came here about a year ago and gave a rapturous speech to a joint session of Congress, that was a special event. He was a wartime president, escaping his country for a short period of time to deliver a very stark message. He's subsequently been here another time and had a closed-door meeting with senators. This will be the third time he's on Capitol Hill in just about a year. And I think there's a sense among most members of Congress is that what else new can you tell us? We are briefed on this issue constantly. We understand what the stakes are, but Republicans have made it very clear, despite having all that information at their disposal, they still believe that a deal on border security is just as, if not more important than funding Ukraine. And I think that most members of Congress believe that funding to Ukraine should be something that the United States continues to do, but they also view this as a political leverage point that they need to take advantage of. And while immigration is no doubt a thorny and sticky topic, they believe that this is the best way to get what they're looking for in this particular window of time, Garrett.
Well, and on the politics of all this, Ryan, most Republicans also believe in supporting additional aid to Israel. But I'm curious what you're picking up about the reaction to the White House going around Congress to unlock some of this aid, $106 million or so, to Israel, when that part of this aid package is arguably the most popular thing that Congress is working on. And it's been stuck since the House passed their version, which had those IRS carts in it, what, a month ago now?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen too many members of Congress come out and attack this particular move by the Biden administration, which could be an indication that perhaps they appreciate the fact that this isn't something that they have to deal with. If this gets Israel over the hump in a short period of time, will they hash out these differences, then they will allow that to happen. The question needs to be asked, though, then why can't they do that for Ukraine as well? I think is something that many people are wondering as well. It's interesting that the White House made a tactical decision here, Garrett, by deciding to package all four of these issues together, that being Israel funding, Ukraine funding, border security, and, of course, funding for Taiwan, with the hope that there are enough members of Congress who care passionately enough about all four of these things that they'll be willing to maybe make concessions in the other areas in order to get that over the finish line. What they risked by putting all these things together is that all four of them could end up dead on arrival as a result of these competing interests all being played out at once. That's what we're seeing play out here right now. And the issue is when you have such a complex piece of legislation, it generally takes time in order to find something that everyone can agree on. And time is not something that they have in a great deal of supply right now, Garrett.
Yeah, time and a hard deadline, which they've also kind of robbed themselves of as they've keep pushing this down the road. Ryan Noble's with us on Capitol Hill, and Hallie Jackson now in the thick of it in Israel. And Hallie, international organizations have been painting this increasingly dire picture of the situation on the ground in Gaza, where we have a very hard time seeing what's going on a day-to-day basis there. What can you tell us about the kind of daily, the situation right now in terms of the humanitarian crisis and the latest with the hostages?
Yeah, definitely. And it's, striking to sit here and listen to your conversation with Ryan Nobles talking about how time is running out in Washington for a very different reason. We are hearing people sound the alarm that time is running out in Gaza for things to essentially change for the better because it is so desperate there. I spoke with somebody who was just in Gaza a couple of days ago with the World Food Program, and he told me that it is close to a breaking point. He believes that the humanitarian crisis is close to a breaking point. When I asked him, listen, how long do you think this situation, as it stands currently, can go on? We are seeing these images, and you're right that it is very difficult to get inside Gaza, but we do have images from inside, from our team who's doing, who's there, showing us what it's like at some of these hospitals, at some of these places where people are just in huge crowds of people waiting for food, for bags of flour. We're hearing stories from aid groups that are working with these civilians that they're rationing water, essentially. So it is a dire situation at this point. And we've also heard, with the nexus to the U.S. here, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, just in the last 24 hours, talk about how there could be more that can be done to, for example, open up some safe corridors for aid to get through, for more clear communication about safe places for civilians in Gaza to go to. Israel has said consistently, and I just spoke with an Israeli politician here a couple of minutes ago who said to me, listen, their concern is that Hamas is getting the aid, is stealing essentially the aid that is meant to go to civilians. All of it, of course, against the backdrop of what Israelis see as this horrific hostage crisis. 137 people believed to be held by Hamas right now. Dozens of them released, obviously, in that temporary ceasefire that we saw a couple weeks ago. And incredibly, our Richard Engel, our colleague who has been doing just amazing work here in Israel, spoke with one of those released hostages in an extraordinary interview. I want to play a little bit of that for you.
There was a ceasefire, a truce, and dozens of hostages got out. How concerned are you about the ones who didn't get out, and why?
Time is limited for life, and when you are over there, the lack of air in the tunnels, as well as the shortage of food and medicine, could bring people to complete exhaustion, and they just won't make it. They need to get out today, otherwise they won't live.
And Richard, we'll have more on that tonight on Nightly News. We know that there have been moments of hope, at least glimmers of hope for some of these families. I spoke with the father of 3 little kids who were taken hostage, and his wife as well, who were released just a couple weeks ago. And he talked about, and it was striking, just the moments of normalcy that they're now experiencing. After spending some time in the hospital, they're back at home, not their home. They were from Kfar Aza, which was decimated by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. They're living elsewhere now, but he talked about just brushing the teeth with the kids, right? Like those moments that I think it can be easy to take for granted, Garrett.
Right, that would be sort of the thing that stick in every parent's mind after a kid goes through something like that. Hallie Jackson, thank you for your reporting for us tonight from Tel Aviv. And joining me now is the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett. Prime Minister, thank you for being with us. I want to ask you, I was just going back and reading something today. You laid out after October 7th the manner in which you thought this war could be conducted, the best, most humanitarian way in which to do it. How do you assess the way the current government, Netanyahu's government, is conducting the war that we have right now?
I think the war has been conducted very well by the IDF and by the government. I think we're methodically fighting and capturing and killing Hamas terrorists who conducted this savage attack of October 7th. And we need more time, and we're going to finish the job.
The rest of the world is very concerned about the civilian casualties the numbers just go up and up. And I know the Israeli government disputes some of the numbers, but something around 18,000 civilian casualties within the Gaza Strip. Do you believe more could or needs to be done to protect the Palestinian civilians during the course of this war?
I think Israel is doing everything more than any other country almost ever has done to protect the civilians of the enemy territory. But at the end of the day, if Hamas is so determined to have its own people killed while fighting us, there's nothing that can stop them from doing it. I mean, we know that they actually shoot at areas where civilians are trying to run away or evacuate themselves. We know that they hide their weapons behind civilians within schools, et cetera, and we're just doing our very best. The ratio right now is much better than it was at the beginning, but we have to complete the job.
I want to ask you, early in the war, President Biden warned Israel, sort of a public comment that got a lot of attention, the idea to not make the same mistakes that he felt that the United States did after 9/11. There's been so many comparisons between October 7th and 9/11. I wonder generally, do you feel like the government heeded those warnings, and how prevalent is that line of thinking about not being consumed by the rage that you feel in the conduct of everything that's happened after October 7th?
Gareth, that's a great question. We're not focused on our rage. We're focused on preventing the next time or the next massacre. Here's the thing. These people are telling us explicitly that if we don't kill them, they're going to conduct more attacks against us. They say it explicitly. They're not saying, no, we want peace or anything like that. So they're telling us, essentially, we're going to continue these sort of massacres. So And this is not at the other side of the world. This is not Afghanistan, thousands of miles away from America. This is on our border.
Right.
And it happened just a couple of months ago.
To the idea that when this war is over, you're still going to be living next door to these people. We've seen images and videos of Palestinian men, stripped down, blindfolded, folks who have been detained by Israeli troops. I think a lot about this idea that you can win militarily against Hamas, but do you worry about the way Palestinians have been treated both in Gaza and in the West Bank, where you might be creating the next generation of the people who will continue this fight against you, that you can win kind of tactically on the ground in Gaza, but lose strategically by a manner in which you're conducting a war and a manner in which you're trying to keep your people safe and end up creating more people who hate you?
Well, I think the massacre of October 7th proved that the approach of, being generous and strengthening their economy did not work. I'm not saying that we want to destroy their economy or anything of that sort, but somehow the regular logics that apply to you and me do not apply to Hamas, because they attacked us without any provocation. There's no territorial dispute down there.
Right.
They're not saying we deserve a piece of land or anything. They just say, we want to destroy you. That's what their charter states. So I think actually the best way to unroot this hate is a full and total defeat.
I want to talk about what happens next. This idea that the Prime Minister said, I guess either today or yesterday, your time, that we're at the beginning of the end of what this war is going to be. What do you think the ending looks like? Who controls Gaza when this is all said and done? I mean, you suggested long before the war the idea that Gaza should be controlled functionally by Egypt. Do you think that's something that could still be on the table? I mean, how do you govern a Gaza that still exists after this war is over?
Yeah, well, first of all, it ends by either killing or capturing all of the Hamas operatives and especially the leadership. Secondly, creating a security buffer zone of about 1.5 kilometers deep into Gaza to move them away from our border. Third, we don't want to govern them. No Israeli has the desire to run their lives. So what I believe is the right thing is to set up an interim technocratic government of competent folks, either from Gaza and or from other Abraham Accord states, and to run the country for a few years until we can set a permanent structure in place.
You mentioned the Abraham Accords. Before October 7th, Israel had been making a ton of progress in the region, sort of setting up relationships with countries whom you used to not have any kind of relationship with. I wonder how big of a setback you think this war has been to that effort, which I know you were involved in the past, and whether you'll be able to find those partners who want to be involved in the governance of Gaza after all this is said and done, given the way the war is going and continues to go for perhaps some more time still.
Yeah, so it depends on the results. The way to reignite the Abraham Accords is to fully eradicate Hamas. If we do that, that's a huge boost to the whole region, because all of the region of the reasonable countries, the Abraham Accord countries, are vehemently against radical Islam. Once we do that, I think we can resume discussions. If we get quagmired without being able to get the job done, that'll slow everything down.
All right, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, I appreciate your time and your expertise on all this. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And coming up, today marks 5 weeks until the Iowa caucuses, and brand new NBC polling shows Trump winning a majority of voter support as the frontrunner surpasses the 50% mark for the first time this cycle. Steve Kornacki's at the big board to break that all down for us next. But first, a potential major new legal development in the Trump investigations, as Special Counsel Jack Smith asked the U.S. Supreme Court to get involved. That story's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Special Counsel Jack Smith is now asking the Supreme Court to decide a question he says is at the heart of American democracy: whether Donald Trump, who's facing criminal prosecution for his actions while president, is protected by presidential immunity. Smith is circumventing the traditional appeals process in his criminal case against the former president, calling it a matter of, quote, imperative public importance. He's asked the court to respond to his request by next Monday. Trump's federal election interference trial is set to begin in March, but the start date will likely be delayed. Now a question of how much. I'm joined now by Carol Lamb, a former U.S. attorney and former federal judge. She's now an NBC News legal analyst. So, Carol, what's Jack Smith's goal here? Just to kind of speed this process along as much as possible?
Absolutely it is, Garrett. This is a race against the clock for Jack Smith. He's doing everything he can to try to preserve that March 4th trial date, or keep it as close to March 4th as he can, given the upcoming Republican National Convention and then, of course, the election in November of 2024. That's his goal here.
He's got some precedent on his side. He cites U.S. v. Nixon in his brief. Do we think the Supreme Court will take up his request? I mean, they presumably could just say, yeah, thanks for the letter, Jack, but we're good.
They absolutely could say that, and it's anybody's guess what they're going to do in this case, because the normal procedure is that any losing party on any motion has to wait until the conclusion of the case before they can take up an appeal. This is an exception to that rule, that general rule. They are allowed to take an immediate appeal of Judge Chutkan's order. This is Trump's team can immediately appeal the denial of their motion in front of Judge Chutkan to dismiss the case, and they have done that. So now Jack Smith is saying we don't have time to wait for the Court of Appeals to follow their normal processes, which sometimes takes months and often more than a year. We're going to go directly to the Supreme Court. So that is what he's asking the court to do, and there is precedent for that. But again, the Supreme Court has a very busy schedule. They've got 9 justices, all 9 justices hear every case that they decide to hear, and they're already in the middle of a very busy term.
And of those 9, 3 of these justices were appointed by Donald Trump to the High Court. And given all the discussion about Supreme Court ethics over the last year or so, would you expect any of them would recuse themselves in a matter like this?
I would not expect a recusal. If we ended up in a place, Garrett, where justices had to recuse themselves because something involved the president who appointed them, I think we'd be in a pretty bad place. The expectation is that justices are going to rule according to the law, and you can see that in the lower courts as well. Some of the judges who have ruled against Donald Trump and his team were, in fact, appointed by Donald Trump. So that's the understanding, that's the expectation of our judges and justices.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it as a tricky precedent, but most former presidents don't talk about their judges versus other people's judges in quite the same way. It's going to be fascinating to see however it breaks out. Carol M., we'll be glad to have you alongside us as we see what the Supreme Court decides to do. And speaking of Donald Trump, in exactly 5 weeks from right now, the presidential primary contest will be getting underway in Iowa. But right now, contest isn't really even the right word, according to our brand new NBC News Des Moines Register Mediacom poll. Now, look, polls are always just a snapshot in time, but take a look at this picture. The former president is now over 50% in our new poll, 32 points ahead of his closest competitor, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And Trump's strength in the poll relatively has grown since October. His challengers have remained pretty much static, swapping a point or two here or there with one another. NBC News' Steve Kornacki is at the big board to break down more of this new Iowa poll. So, Steve, do your thing. Dig into these numbers a little bit. What more can you tell us about the strength of Donald Trump's lead here?
Yeah, I think, look, it's the size of the lead, as you mentioned, and it's the trend, picking up 8 points from where he was in our poll in October. And I think especially the context, because think of the last month or 6 weeks. Ron DeSantis is really going all out in Iowa. He wants to sort of use that as a slingshot to success later on. He got the endorsement of the governor. He got the endorsement of a top evangelical leader in the state. He got a lot of media attention in Iowa for completing a visit to all 99 counties. He had a Fox News one-on-one debate with Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California. A lot of Republicans were watching and surely appreciated him going after Newsom. There was some sense that maybe if DeSantis was going to get traction, this was the combination that would do it. But no, he moved up a couple points. It's Trump, though, who's really showing the momentum. And again, Trump, who continues to avoid right through last week, standing on the stage with any of his opponents. Now an outright majority supporting Trump. Just take a look at some of the key groups that are powering Trump in Iowa. Here's a biggie, evangelicals. He gets the exact same, Trump does exact same level of support with evangelicals as he has overall. An outright majority, 51%. This is a big change from 2016. Remember, Trump lost the caucuses to Ted Cruz in 2016. One of the reasons he lost in 16, he finished third with this group, third with the evangelicals. Now he's 2-1 over DeSantis with evangelicals. Another source of strength for Trump in this poll, those who say they're going to attend a caucus for the first time. They tend to be much younger than the overall Republican electorate. Trump getting 63% from them, DeSantis only 12%. And then how about this? The question of electability against Joe Biden. Trump's opponents at the start of this campaign certainly thought this might be his Achilles heel. He'd be tied up in court. The indictments would do damage in general election polls, and Republicans would look for a safer option. But look, you ask Republicans in Iowa, there's a lot of words here, but basically, with all the legal charges, can Trump win? Basically, 3/4 say yes, only about 1/4 say no. And this is a big number, and it's also 8 points higher than it was just back in October in our poll. So as this goes along, Trump is convincing more Republicans in Iowa that he can beat Joe Biden.
We're going to talk more about the electability question with our panel here in a minute. But, Steve, I'm squinting at this graphic here. Is there any silver lining in this poll for the non-Trump candidates? I'm struggling to find it.
Yeah, nothing too explicit and obvious. You got to, if you're a Trump rival here, you got to hope more than you can stare at these numbers. But I think a couple things you could look at. You do the favorable, unfavorable numbers among Republicans in Iowa, and Trump is the most popular here at 72%. If you're DeSantis, this is the best piece of news for you in the poll. You continue to be very popular, liked by Republicans in Iowa. Look at that, 66% favorable, 29 unfavorable. It's been the story for a while with DeSantis. Republicans aren't saying, oh, we don't like him. They've been exposed to him, and they say, we do like him. But they just continue in increasing numbers to say they prefer Trump as their nominee. DeSantis has been trying to break through that. So far, he hasn't found a way. In the poll we just showed, it says he's getting farther from that goal. And then look at this. Is your mind made up? You look at that Trump, again, 51% overall support for Trump, and 70% of those voters say their mind's made up. It's not changing. And you look at DeSantis, you look at Haley, and it's much more fluid. They have a lot less locked in, and a lot more of their support is soft than Trump's.
Right, and it seems to be that the numbers are just sort of them swapping some voters back and forth every time we do this poll. Steve Kornacki, thank you so much for breaking it down. Like I said, we'll talk much more about this coming up on our deeper dive into the state of the 2024 race and what the former president's strength in the polls means for the current president. This is House Republicans prepare to formally launch an impeachment inquiry. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back, and let's stick with our brand new NBC News Des Moines Register Mediacom poll out of Iowa, shall we? To put into perspective just how dominant President Trump has been in this Republican primary, you're looking now at his three weakest groups in the poll. That's college-educated Republican caucus goers, independents, and suburban voters. Even in his weakest demographics, Trump has a double-digit lead against his closest rivals. So 5 weeks out now from caucus day, Trump is well ahead out now of the Republican primary field by every single metric in this poll. Joining me now on set is Akayla Gardner, White House correspondent for Bloomberg News. Cornell Belcher is with us, Democratic pollster and NBC News political analyst. And Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. So, Akayla, I'll start with you. We've been talking about this lead. It is strong. It is durable. Is the race in Iowa now just for second place? Do we need to just change how we're talking about this?
If it's for second place, it's a distant second based on this poll. And I think the biggest loss is for Ron DeSantis. As we just heard in the last segment from Steve, he visited all 99 counties. He was really hoping that was going to be able to get him enough support to, even as his campaign said, they just wanted a strong second place finish. And 19% is not exactly what they were looking for. He has the endorsement of the governor. He has this top evangelical leader. Trump in this poll still leads with evangelical voters, which are key in the state. And I think it's just a huge loss for him. And also for Nikki Haley, who has really had this big boost in national attention. She was also in a distant third place.
She seems like the one who still has room to grow. But Sarah, if you're Ron DeSantis, you've done everything you're supposed to do in Iowa. You got the governor's endorsement, as Akayla was just saying. Right. The voters are even saying, we like you, but like we really just don't want you to be president right now. What, if anything, can Ron DeSantis do differently? Or are the voters telling him, like, hey, maybe call us again in 2027?
I think the voters are telling him, call us again in 2027, and maybe he should drop out. I mean, I hate to see him. He is going to lose, and it will be a distant second. And if he wants to be the top runner in 2028, maybe he should get out now and kind of save a little of integrity and then run in 3.5 years.
Cornell, go ahead.
As a pollster, though, I do want to caution us. Polls are a snapshot, as you've talked about, and sometimes polls get wrong because they get the electorate wrong. What I will say is that regardless of the poll, Donald Trump's numbers have been fairly consistent and large. And look, there's a difference here between sort of, for us in polling, is how do you get to 50 plus 1? Because when you get to 50 plus 1, you win, right? And so I don't care about what the margin is. But what I've seen consistently in Donald Trump is, and this is the poll that I think is important because he's now at a margin where they can't catch him, right? Even regardless of who drops out of this race, they can't overtake him, which is a really, really powerful position. But I wanted to make that sort of clarification for our audience, because I think there's way too much talk about polling, way too much coverage of polling, and a lot of people don't understand polling.
Right. Polls at this stage aren't right or wrong. They just tell you a thing today that may not still be true when we actually start voting.
Well, as someone who worked for Obama, a lot of the polls early on were not true of what actually happened in that race.
Fair enough. I want to read for you something that I think encapsulates the electability problem in this race, and it's not the electability problem that we thought we'd have. This is from one of the voters who participated in our poll. This voter said, I think a ham sandwich could probably win a general election against Joe Biden, and it's all Biden's fault. This was from Aaron Mann of Fort Madison, Iowa, who said he's caucusing for Trump. The other Republican candidates all thought they could make a Trump can't win argument. That does not seem to be the case here. Biden's relative weakness is rocket fuel for Trump at this stage, is it not?
I think so. And I think that quote we just saw from the voter underscores there's just a huge segment of voters who do not want to see a rematch of Biden and Trump again. And I also think the economy continues to weigh down the president. They continue to say that inflation, high prices, those are the things that are top of mind. And right now, voters simply do not trust the president on the issue of the economy. And Donald Trump, frankly, is associated with a time where the economy was better before the pandemic and, frankly, before even Biden took office.
But, like, Sarah, if you're a DeSantis stan and you're a big DeSantis donor, is your money better spent propping up Joe Biden right now than it is to Ron DeSantis? Because the whole argument was supposed to be from DeSantis, Trump is too flawed, he's too divisive, he may be in jail, you need an electable me to beat Joe Biden. But if all these Republican voters think a ham sandwich can beat Joe Biden, they're going to vote for the ham sandwich they know and love, and that's Donald Trump.
They are. So if I was a DeSantis donor, I'd probably now go to Trump at this point. Why would I go to Biden? Trump is clearly in the lead. He is probably going to be the nominee unless he goes to jail. I mean, that's really what this is. So I think they're going to start to jump back to Trump. And You know, and Biden, I don't think Trump is beating Biden. I think Biden's beating himself.
Well, let's go to our pollster on that question, because we do have new polls today in some of these swing states, Cornell, from CNN, that show the president struggling against Donald Trump in both Georgia and in Michigan. How do you see the picture of the theoretical general election?
Well, you know, again, I worked for a guy in 2011 who the headline said, you know, he was toast.
I remember that.
And he was running behind Mitt Romney, and he was actually tied with. I
think he ran ahead of Mitt Romney pretty much the whole way.
Not in the New York Times poll. In the New York Times poll in 2011, at the same time, he was running behind Mitt Romney. Believe me, I know.
You're more mentally scarred by that than I am, I'm sure.
I had to live through it. But again, it's about the story that the president has to tell. You know, did Obama have a good story to tell? And to your point about the economy, look, Republicans are always better on the economy in voters' minds. But what we did in Obama campaign was what we made it about who's going to fight for the middle class, right? Because Mitt Romney had a natural advantage on the economy. And I think this president has actually a better story to tell about the economy and moving the country in a direction even better than Barack Obama. And particularly when it comes to, as you know, it's going to be the contrast. It's going to be the contrast between what Donald Trump has to offer versus what Joe Biden has to offer. And those dynamics haven't unfolded yet.
To the degree they haven't unfolded, though, some of that, I think, is on the White House, right? We've not seen the president really roll out his campaign in a lot of early states. They've spent some money on the air. What do you make of the way in which they're telling the story that they have to
I hear this from reporters all the time, and it's not a 50-yard dash. It's a marathon. They can't spend all their money now, and quite frankly, most Americans aren't paying attention. But they have a plan to start spending the money and telling that conversation, particularly as the primaries begin to end on the Republican side. I would never advise a campaign to start spending tons of money communicating right now. It has to be a slow burn.
One of the other things that could change the dynamic in this race is the impeachment inquiry that's about to get formalized later this week. Kayla, I'm curious your view on this. If Republicans start down this path, I don't know how they get off it. I cannot imagine a scenario in which House Republicans will vote to acquit Joe Biden. But when they start down this, how does the impeachment question, based on what we've seen of their efforts so far, help or hurt the president's reelection in your view?
I think what's frustrating for the White House right now is they really thought this was not something that was going to materialize. But we've seen now more centrist Republicans, more moderate Republicans willing to be able to formalize this, even if just for the fact that it would give subpoenas more teeth, it would give them the ability to get more evidence. But I think Republicans are really going to use this to sort of undermine any Democratic attacks against the president's 2 impeachments, as well as his multiple myriad of legal challenges. But I don't know if it actually resonates with voters. I don't think this is something that's top of mind for people that are going to cast their ballots in 2024.
This is what drives me crazy about the House Republican strategy here, because it's the kind of folks you represent, the Republican Main Street Partnership, who are going to have to own this. And we're going to vote for an inquiry because we're just asking questions. Only flies if you can stop the inquiry if you find that the answers are not sufficient to impeach. Can your members get out of that trap if 6 months from now it turns out there really is no evidence that Joe Biden did anything impeachable?
Absolutely, and that's the plan. If there's nothing there, then they will not ever vote to impeach him. 100%.
All right.
They do need
We're
to
saving
move.
that tape because
I will.
I'm not,
That's
I'm
fine.
not totally sure I believe
I
you
will
there.
guarantee you that, but they have to get information, and the White House has not been forthcoming. So I agree with what they're doing here in this first step.
Is there an impeachment trap here, Cornell?
I'm going to follow what Mitt Romney said at this very table yesterday, and there's no there there. There's not a lot of evidence on this, and I think Republicans will be better served by focusing on issues that are important to America. And again, like Chip Roy said, what do we have to take to the American people to run on? And it can't be Hunter Biden, and it can't be impeachment. It has to be something about the economy. And again, they ran a lot on crime and safety. I haven't seen their crime and safety bill.
But on all due respect to Mitt Romney, we don't know yet. We have to do the research to find out if there isn't anything there.
But you do that before you start an impeachment.
Well,
but we're not getting everything answered.
How many impeachment inquiry angels can dance on the head of a pin? I'm going to give Kayla one last bite at our top story here, because tomorrow is going to be kind of another Ukraine day here in Washington with Zelensky here in town, meeting with the president. Do you think Zelensky can move the needle? What do we need to see happen from these meetings here to get the aid that he so desperately wants unlocked?
I think the contrast is just even look a year ago when Zelensky came to Washington in December. He received a hero's welcome. He addressed a joint session of Congress. It's probably going to look a lot more like September, where he had very closed-door meetings, now with a new speaker in Mike Johnson, who actually voted against Ukraine funding after that visit in September. So it's much of the same, but also you can just not be sure if Zelensky is going to be able to get enough support around funding. I think there's not enough evidence to say that he can't.
All right, that Mike Johnson meeting is the one I'm going to be watching for. Kayla, Sarah, and Cornell Belcher, we have to leave it there. We're saving the tape about the impeachment inquiry. And before we go to break, we have to note some disturbing developments from the campaign trail this week. A New Hampshire man has been arrested and is facing federal charges for threatening to kill Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. The FBI says the man responded last week to a campaign text message about an upcoming event in New Hampshire. According to federal investigators, the man, Tyler Anderson, texted that he would kill Ramaswamy and, quote, everyone who attends. The FBI did not explicitly name Ramaswamy as the target of that threat, but his campaign later confirmed it was directed at them. Ramaswamy told reporters he's grateful for the quick response from law enforcement, and the campaign says it's full steam ahead with their current schedule. After the break, NBC News sits down with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer as Democrats in the key battleground state navigate two issues at the center of our national politics: abortion and war. We'll have that exclusive interview after the break. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. This morning, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer repealed a state law that required women to buy a separate rider on their health insurance to cover abortions. The measure was first put in place a decade ago and was dubbed rape insurance by activists since it did not differentiate pregnancies resulting from rape. Repealing the law is the latest in a series of moves Whitmer has made on abortion access in Michigan after voters enshrined abortion rights into the state's constitution last year. Before Governor Whitmer officially repealed that law this morning, she talked to NBC News' Julie Sirkin about the push to protect abortion access and what it means for Democrats in 2024.
It says that you, through your work in the legislature, now as governor, have been on offense when it comes to protecting a woman's right.
Well, when the people get to decide, they overwhelmingly tell us they expect to have reproductive freedom. That's what the voters said when they went to the polls last November, not just by re-electing me and a bunch of other pro-choice leaders across the state, but by amending our Constitution and saying these are rights we expect. To see what happened in Kansas and then Kentucky and Ohio. And I'm a Michigander. This is football season. I don't usually compliment Ohio, but hats off to the people of Ohio who rejected all the misinformation and codified this right for women in that state just south of us. I'm really pleased to see that. And any leader who's not listening to the people, who's not paying attention to this, that may not survive another election.
NBC News correspondent Julie Sirkin joins me now. So, Julie, take me through your conversation with the governor today as she repealed this law. What did it mean to her? What does it mean for the state?
Well, this is really personal for Whitmer. It's a full circle moment, if you will, because a decade ago when she was in the state legislature as a state senator, she actually shared her personal story of rape before her colleagues, something she was not prepared to do, she told me today. But she did that in hopes of appealing to them so that they would not pass a bill like this, one requiring women to get elective insurance coverage in order to get the abortion procedure through. That being said, that was unsuccessful. But today, 10 years later, she was able to sign a repeal of that law. And by the way, that's not the only restriction she's been managed to chip away at when it comes to what's been in Michigan's constitution, what's been in the law here, because she signed other measures just this month, for example, in order to do that very thing. This certainly builds on the legacy she created last election. She told me a little bit about that in our conversation. I mean, this is really an issue that not only carried her to victory, but managed the full state Democrats to get some pretty historic leads here. And she says that abortion is an issue Democrats on the national level should be paying attention to also. And she sees it being a major issue at the ballot box in 24 as well.
Every indication from what we've seen from all of these special elections certainly points us in that direction. Julie, you also talked to her about the impact that the Israel-Hamas war is having there in Michigan on Muslim and Arab and Jewish American communities in Michigan. What's the impact that she's seeing there as governor?
Let me just set the scene here a little bit for our viewers. I'm in Detroit. About 15 minutes away from here is a community called Dearborn. It has the largest majority Arab American population really in the country. Per capita, the largest number of Muslim Americans, of course, not all Arab Americans identify as such, live here. And a couple of miles away from there are predominantly Jewish suburban neighborhoods. So you really get all of this coming into real practicality here. This isn't just a war that's happening hundreds of miles away in Israel and in Gaza. This is something that affects people here daily. You have universities, colleges here as well, where this has been an issue on campuses. And when I spoke to the governor, she told me when she speaks to her voters, because of course nobody knows the people who live here best than the governor, this is an issue really on their minds. Watch what she told me.
Wherever an innocent person is killed, I think that it is cause to mourn and to reach out and to support one another. These geopolitical issues are taking a toll, and so I do worry about how people are feeling and mourning and concerned for their loved ones. And yet it's my job as governor of Michigan to make sure that I do everything to bring down the heat here at home and to protect people, and that's where my focus is, and I'm grateful that the president has shared that focus.
Now, Garrett, interestingly, she also told me that, quote, nothing should be taken for granted when it comes to President Biden and the support he could see here from those key groups. Just a quick data point here. In 2020, when Biden managed to flip this state, the former president, of course, winning it narrowly in 2016, he did so by 150,000 votes. And that is about the same number of Arab Americans who turned out and voted in that election, too. A majority of them are Democrats who supported President Biden. And it's a real fear, even in my conversation with Whitmer, that they could potentially not do the same or just sit home altogether in this next coming election.
Yeah, the Biden campaign's going to need her with her finger on the pulse there in Michigan. Julie, thank you for that reporting and that great interview. And still to come, new developments in the battle over emergency abortion access in Texas, where a pregnant woman is battling the clock and state law with her health on the line. That story is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The fight over abortion access in Texas and the impact of the state's abortion ban is back in the national spotlight right now, thanks to one woman's legal struggle to end her high-risk pregnancy. Kate Cox, a Dallas area mother of two, was forced to leave Texas today to receive an abortion after being warned that her health and her ability to have more children would be in danger without one, and after Texas officials moved to stop her from receiving one in her home state. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett joins me now to break down the legal implications in this case and what comes next. So, Laura, just walk us through how this case has unfolded up until this point and the legal ramifications of what we may see next.
Yeah, it's really been something of a legal whiplash for Kate Cox. She's a 31-year-old mother of two. And Garrett, what she really wants the most is a healthy baby girl. But her doctors have told her that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, her baby is suffering from trisomy 18, a genetic condition, which means that baby is not going to survive. And her doctors have told her the safest thing for her, if she wants to have another baby, is to get an emergency abortion. She got a court order saying that she could get it. And despite that court order, the state of Texas sent a bunch of hospitals in Texas letters, potentially to the doctors who would be able to do that abortion, saying, if you do it, we're watching you, and we will come after you with civil and criminal penalties if you do that abortion. Then the state of Texas went to the highest court in Texas, the Texas Supreme Court, saying, please make sure you can stop this. Please tell that judge below that they got it wrong. Well, the high court then put everything on pause, essentially to maintain the status quo, Garrett. But by maintaining the status quo in the legal sense, it actually is quite dire for her. And tonight, Kate Cox's lawyers have said that her health condition deteriorated so badly that she now has to flee her home state in order to get this abortion.
So the Attorney General in Texas, Ken Paxton, had warned doctors and hospitals that he would potentially go after them if they had somehow helped her receive an abortion in Texas. Are any of those agencies, are the activists who helped her leave the state, is Kate Cox herself at any additional legal jeopardy for choosing to leave the state now?
I think that's an open question. I think at this point, obviously, she's probably most focused on her health care instead of sort of the legal ramifications of it. I mean, this is a person, Garrett, who has been in the emergency room 4 times in the last month. That's how bad this has gotten for her. And so I think, obviously, she wanted to probably see this legal case through to the extent she could. But first and foremost, she's a mom of 2, and she's trying to make sure she stays alive for those 2 children. And so I think that was probably the first priority. And certainly, we haven't seen as many of sort of these these one-off civil suits, as we might have expected after Texas passed that law, which gives essentially anybody the ability to sue civilly in court. And we're talking about the Uber driver that drives her to the anesthesiologist. Everybody has standing to sue in Texas. They're one of the most restrictive laws. But I think it remains to be seen whether they come after her for fleeing the state.
From a political perspective, from my day job, this feels like exactly the kind of scenario that Democrats have been warning about when these states try to put these more restrictive abortion bans in place. Have we seen any precedent generated by what we did see of this legal case? Obviously, we didn't see sort of all the way to the conclusion here that'll inform how these things get decided down the road?
I think what's been sort of illuminating here, and it certainly was illuminating to Kate Cox when we spoke with her last week for Nightly, Garrett, is that people might be surprised to know just how bad things have to get before you can qualify for a medical exception, right? So Texas has these bans, but they always say, well, the health of the mother, then you can get an abortion. Well, it turns out even at 20 weeks, when you're having cramping and you're leaking amniotic fluid, you still can't get an abortion, at least in her case. Texas is saying she doesn't qualify for one. I think that would be surprising to many people.
I think it will be, and I think they'll be hearing about it a lot as we turn to election season with this issue on so many minds. Laura Jarrett, thank you for your reporting on it as always.
Yep.
And thank you all for being with us this hour. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Christine Romans in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.